Good evening and welcome to today's penultimate session of the 2022 Literary Festival hosted by Indo-American Arts Council. My name is Richard Tiga, and as the Chief Administrator of Accounting and Finance for the organization, I'm delighted to introduce to you esteemed author Kirthana Ramisetti, who will be talking about her recently released novel, Dava Shastri's Last Day. Kirthana Ramisetti has a master's degree in writing from Emerson College and has published work in major news outlets, such as the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Atlantic, and elsewhere. Dava Shastri's Last Day, a novel, has also received great reviews from these major publications. Moderating this book talk is Saumya Dave, right? Okay. Who is a writer, psychiatrist, and mental health advocate. Saumya is also an author of 2 books. I'm sure this book talk will be splendid and fascinating. Once again, I welcome you all. Thank you.
Hello? Okay. Can everyone hear us? I think you can by the nods. So how's everyone doing tonight? Thank you so much for being with us. We know that it's been a day full of learning and engaging with creatives, so we appreciate you being here. I'm so excited to be here with Kirthana because I'm a big fan of hers and I'm lucky enough now to be able to call her a friend. Before we get into talks about the books, I just wanted to talk about how you're doing today. How's it going?
I love that. I'm good. How are you? And by the way, thank you for doing this event with me.
Oh, this is such an honor because, so Kirthana and I get together and we talk about writing anyway, so to be able to do it in a group just feels extra special, right?
I think you guys just get to listen in on a conversation we'd have anyway, like if we went out for a glass of wine, so.
So I wanted to just jump in and talk about Dava and how I love her character. I actually hadn't read a character like Dava before until I read this book. And I loved, after reading your book, seeing comparisons to Succession. But what I liked even better about your story is that there's a Desi woman at the center of it, and she's the one with the power. So I was wondering how you came up with her. Was she someone who you always had in the back of your mind? Was there something that inspired you?
Sure. By the way, can you hear me okay? Great. So I used to work as an entertainment reporter at the New York Daily News, and one of the things we did in that role was to cover the deaths of celebrities. And we had to write obituaries. And in part of that role, one of the first things we had to do was watch the real-time reaction on social media anytime a celebrity passed away. So anytime I saw that outpouring of grief and sadness and the fond remembrances that people shared, I wondered if other notable people would see that reaction and wonder what would be said about them when their time came. And so that idea just kind of stayed with me for a long time. And then one day I thought, well, what if somebody was so obsessed that they announced the death early just so they could read their obituaries? And that's when the novel was born from.
Love that.
And once I decided, committed to writing this novel, I thought the easiest thing to do would be to make it a celebrity, right? Like an actress or a singer. But I thought it'd be more interesting to do somebody who was self-made, who was a business person, who was an entrepreneur, and so that's why that person would be so obsessed with how they were perceived and what their legacy would be. And then because I'm Indian American, I love reading, I love books, but I don't really see myself reflected very often in the books that I read. I thought there's no reason why this person who does this crazy, bold thing, she can't be Indian American. There's just no reason for it. So once I committed to writing this novel, I decided to make her Indian American and have her be so focused on her legacy that she would do something that was, pretty out there, to be honest.
Well, what I love, though, about that is that she is this larger-than-life character, but also I think all of us can understand that idea of how we're perceived by others, and I'm sure we were told by our parents or other people in our community, what will people think? And how will people think of you, and how will people perceive you? So it was both universal and I think also relatable in a way, too, which I thought was really, really fun to read. Was there anything about writing the book that surprised you at all throughout the process?
In looking back, I think the most surprising thing was how much fun it was. So this is actually my 3rd time attempting to write a novel. And my first 2 times writing a novel, I feel like I was more attuned to what do I think will sell in the marketplace? What do readers want to know? And so Dava was my 3rd attempt in writing a novel in about the space of 20 years. So I thought if I'm going to...
20 years.
20 years. So I thought if I'm going to go for it, let me write about everything that I'm interested in and somehow make that coherent to a novel. So I took, family, pop culture, legacy, music. I kind of found a way to put all these things that I'm passionate about and put it into the narrative of the novel. And somehow, because it was something I was interested in, I wasn't really focused on, can I get this published? It was just like, can I write this novel and enjoy writing it? Because one of the things you know well also, just because you write a novel, doesn't mean anyone will ever read it. Doesn't mean it will get published.
Yes, the hard truth, very much so.
So I thought, if I'm going to write this novel and commit to it, let me at least make it an experience that I will enjoy. Experience in my life. I don't think I'll have another one like it, and that's why it's very special to me.
Oh, that's so amazing that it was a place of joy for you. And I hear that. I think anyone who creates anything, no matter what it is, whether it's a book, a poem, a musical piece, I think they wonder, am I doing this for the audience? Should I be doing this for the audience? Or should I just go with what I feel inside and let that guide me? And that can be such a push and pull sometimes. Can we talk about some of the other characters in the book? Because I found them so nuanced and richly drawn out. And I was wondering, did you know who they were going to be? Or did you learn about them as you went along with the book writing process?
So one of the things I decided before I even started to write the novel was I couldn't just figure it out as I went along, because I knew this was, first of all, this novel takes place in 2044, which is 20 years in the future. Again, I tailored this novel to my interests, and so to be able to write about certain things, I had to set in 20 years in the future. But it's also a family saga with, multi-generational children and parents and grandchildren. So for me, to make sure I could sustain the novel and make sure that it made narrative sense, I had to figure out who the characters were before I started writing. So even before I wrote the first page, I did a character spreadsheet where I figured out every single character, their personality quirks, their relationship to Dava, and their arc over the course of the novel.
You did that for all of them, all the family members?
All of all the family members.
Oh, wow. Were there any family members who changed, or any relationships that changed within the family members, or you feel like character-wise it stayed the same from that spreadsheet onwards?
It stayed the same pretty much. I did get rid of one grandchild. There's supposed to be another
rough.
granddaughter, and just I was like, I don't need her. So.
What's it called? Kill your darlings, right?
Yes.
Right. Is that the phrase that
Yes.
they use? Oh, that's so fun. Is there a character that you don't like as a person?
That's such a good question. I'd love to ask you the same question too.
I'm happy to answer it. But yeah, I feel like we're always asked, who's your favorite and who do you want to be with? But is there anyone that you felt, this is a tough person, but I'm still rooting for them anyway?
I think I like all of them. I think you have to find something very sympathetic about each of your characters, no matter how unlikable they seem. And so I think Arvind would be like the person who would be the easiest person to say, but I think I like all of them. I think they all represent different ideas I wanted to discuss when it comes to family and legacy. And so, yeah, I think I actually like all of them.
Oh, that's so nice. That's great. They all are people you want to root for. I think I love seeing the bonds between the siblings too, and the way they call each other out. I know you and I, when we've had our writing dates, we've talked about that just the family dynamics are always so rich with how you know people for so long, but the way that you experience the same memories can be so different, right?
Oh, completely. And that's one of the things I really learned and kind of took as a lesson for myself in writing this novel. I think we all have a sense of who people in our lives are. And we kind of painted this narrative of who our mother is, or who our father is, who our siblings are. And it's really important to kind of maybe see things from their perspective rather than our own, and have more empathy, and maybe you can see them in a different way. And in writing, especially the sibling relationships and their relationship with Dava, because they had a very concrete way of looking at her. And then once these secrets come out about her after she, quote unquote, dies, because I should explain in the novel what happens is, so Dava is a very wealthy philanthropist who is obsessed with herself and obsessed with her, how people see her. So she announces her death early so she can read her obituaries. And then after doing that, she's horrified when her two biggest secrets are revealed to the world. And her 4 children are horrified because they had this very concrete idea of who their mother was. And in learning these secrets about her, they had to really rethink who their mother was and what kind of relationship they wanted to have with her before she actually passes away. And so in writing the novel, I had to really think about taking those lessons too, and not adhering to the narrative and the idea of who I think the people in my life are, but trying to be more empathetic and learn more about them. So it was actually a lesson for me too.
I love that. I love that when the writing process brings lessons for your own life too. And one thing I know that we've talked about is that idea that when we see people we grew up with outside of the roles that we saw them in, we can really learn a lot, right? They're not just my brother or sister, my mother or father. They were a holistic person, maybe before I came along and definitely after we were connected. And so there's an entire world that they're a part of that I might not know. Can you tell us, so really big news. So This book was optioned by HBO for a television series. Incredibly exciting. Is there anything you can tell us about it? I know that there are so many nuances behind it, but anything you can share?
I can share that TV development is very slow.
That's very true.
I don't really have anything to share as of yet, but the one thing I can say, and it's again something we've discussed, I never, like, when I learned that I had a book deal and this book would get published, I had a lot of things on my dream list, but optioning for TV or movies, I'm like, that's not happening. You
You didn't think that would happen for you?
Not at all, because I grew up with never seeing myself represented on television, and the cast in my novel would be primarily Indian, and I'm just like, no one on TV is gonna go for that. So it was actually felt really good when it did get optioned, because I'm like, even if it doesn't happen, just the idea that somebody wants to see this represented on television is amazing to me, and it felt like a really big deal.
No, that's so exciting, and I feel like we're finally in a time where we're starting to see more of those stories on the screen, and we're still not there yet, where the representation is really there for everyone who's taking in the stories, but it's slowly getting there. So that's so exciting. Have you thought of who you would cast if you did have all casting power in any of the roles? Like, anybody come to mind for anyone?
I need to develop a better answer to this question, because I've been asked.
Have you been asked it? Okay.
But I mean, the one thing I've said, because the novel takes place over Dava's life, so while it starts in 2044 when she's 70, it flashes back to when she's younger. So I always thought Parminder Nagra from ER and Bend It Like Beckham, I'd love as a younger Dava.
Love her.
That's my only dream casting. Other than that, I think one of the great things about if this does become a TV show, I think it'd be amazing if it gave opportunities to South Asian actors who might not other get the chance to be featured in prominent roles. So that's my dream. Maybe just young, undiscovered talents would be featured.
Oh, I love that so much. And for anyone who doesn't know, we are actually also TV and movie twins. We like the exact same things, right? I feel like we
totally are.
We like the exact same shows and movies. And I just rewatched Bend It Like Beckham for the first time, so I highly recommend doing that. If anybody's looking for exciting Saturday night plans, I do recommend doing that. And I can see her in the role you said.
That's so funny. I rewatched it earlier this year because I hadn't seen it since I think it was in the theaters, and it's just still so good.
It still holds up.
And it makes me actually angry that Parminder didn't become the superstar that she should have been, if that, because that was like a huge breakout role for her. And if that movie had come out maybe like 10 years later, she would have been the major star. Anyway, not to go off subject.
Well, I was also very, very fortunate to be able to read an early copy of your upcoming book. Is there anything you can share with us about that? I loved it so much, and I'm so excited for it to be out soon. And I know everyone else is going to fall in love with it too. But anything that you feel like you can share with us about what to expect?
Sure. So I have a second novel coming out in April. It's called Advika and the Hollywood Wives. And since I will admit it was inspired by a binge watch of Real Housewives of Beverly Hills.
Also one of our shared interests.
And I say that because to anyone who thinks that like some things are guilty pleasures and not worth it, you never know what will spark an idea. And so I remember I was at the end of 2020, we're all exhausted from the pandemic. I just wanted to turn off my brain and watch something fun, and I was watching that.
That'll do it.
And that will do it. And then it inspired this idea for a novel. So anyways, so I think going forward, just in general, the two things I will always write about, I'll incorporate pop culture in some way in my novels. Dava is very heavily pop culture. The second one, Advika, is also, and I'll always probably have a female Indian protagonist in the lead. That's also very important to me. So in this novel, my main character, she's an aspiring screenwriter, mourning the death of her twin sister. And to pay the bills, she works at after parties for A-list events such as the Oscars. So while she's working at the Governor's Ball, which is the after party for the Oscars, she meets Julian Zelding, who's a very wealthy and Oscar-winning film producer. They have a whirlwind courtship despite their 40-year age difference and get married. And then a month after their marriage, Julian's first wife dies, and she leaves in her will $1 million for Advika and says, if you divorce him, I'll give you this money. And she's like, who the hell did I marry? Let me go find out. So she researches all his ex-wives, who she used to be married to. Julian's ex-wives were an actress, a pop star, and a reality star. And so by going through their experiences, she kind of has her eyes open to who she actually married.
Oh my gosh, I'm excited to reread it just based off, right? Doesn't that sound so good? So excited. I also love your other writing as well. And I know, you had such an incredible career doing writing in all types of outlets. And so wondering if novel writing felt ever similar to that, or if it felt like a totally different skill set that you had to get.
Totally different in a lot of ways. I used to work as an entertainment reporter. I also I still write pop culture essays and criticism. And so fiction is so freeing because it's just, you can make up whatever you want. You don't have to hew to the facts at all. You don't have to interview sources. You can do what you like, which I find very freeing. But I do say, you actually emailed me about, I wrote about The Good Wife several years ago.
Oh, so good. It was so good. Did anybody else watch The Good Wife in this room? You should look up her article in The Atlantic about, if you've seen the whole series though, because there's a potential spoiler if you're starting.
But anyway, so I like learning about pop culture because I feel like the pop culture we consume is very much a reflection of who we are as a society. Same with celebrity gossip. So it was really fun to take something I've always loved to do anyways and find a way to incorporate that into my fiction.
Oh, I love that. I love that too. And that's so cool that you can do both types of writing. I feel like that's a unique skill set to be able to do that.
I never thought of it that way, but
yeah. Yeah, it totally is. I just want to pause and see, does anybody have any questions from the audience at all?
I think yes and no. I think I was very used to writing. Like when you write, especially when you're reporting on a story, you have to kind of follow a certain formula in terms of presenting the facts and the information. And so when you just suddenly have to, you're facing a blank page and you have to write a story and you have nothing to refer to. You have no interview sources, you have no facts, it's just all purely coming from your brain. It's a different experience. So knowing that, facing the blank page and being able to write every day is really difficult and a challenge. So the thing I did to set myself up for success is I outlined the entire novel in advance. Because that was the only way I felt like I'd actually finish it, especially since it has a cast of about 10 characters. And to be able to keep track of everybody, I had to kind of do a lot of legwork before I started the novel. So that's what helped me, because I think if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have been able to finish it.
So still some structure to help guide the process. Did you do that for both novels? You outlined for both of them?
Sort of. So the first one, I completely outlined in advance. I also did a chronology of Dava's entire life from birth until death because I had to know when the important parts of her life took place. My second book, I kind of wrote it in a panic because I basically sold it on proposal, which means I sold it based on a synopsis and sample chapters. And so once it was accepted, I was like, oh crap.
That's always fun, right? You're like, oh, now I have to do this?
And I'm like, oh, now I have to write it. So I kind of would outline a few chapters and then write it, and then outline a few chapters and then write it. And that was what worked for me, but it was a challenge for sure.
Yeah, it's so interesting how book one and book two can vary in that way depending on the deal. Sorry, I see a hand over there. Oh, no.
Even though you're using an outline, when you're actually writing it, can it change?
Oh, definitely. I think it can change, especially if it's certain details or certain, if I want a chapter focused on a certain character and then I realize, oh, wait a minute, I should probably focus on another person entirely. There are changes you can make and surprises to be had, which was one of the fun things. I hear sometimes people say, if you outline a novel, you take out all the creative joy, but within the structure of the outline, I was still surprising myself about what the characters would say or the actions they would make. So yeah, I would say there's still ways that the novel can evolve even if you do a full outline beforehand.
I wonder if even sometimes the structure gives you that freedom because you know that you can always have that structure to go back to.
Oh, 100%, yeah, because I think of it as having a roadmap and always knowing what's going to happen next. Because that was the thing that derailed me, I think, with my first two novels. I was always like, and now what?
The big question, and now what?
And so even if I was floundering within a certain chapter, I thought, well, as long as I get to the end of this one, I know what the next one will be about. And that made it so much easier during the writing process.
Ooh. Well, speaking actually of the word process, do you have a specific ritual or set of things you do or routine or anything like that that helps with your writing?
My ritual has changed. So for the first novel, it was pre-pandemic, so I would go to a local coffee shop, listen to a lot of music, and write. For my second novel, I was at home a lot more, but I missed the chatter and the conversation and the ambiance a coffee shop would provide. So honestly had a lot of TV on in the background. Sometimes it'd be like The Good Wife, to be honest. I had the entire...
Ooh, good TV.
Yeah. Like shows I've seen before, or things I don't have to pay attention to just because I just like having that white noise in a way. And then that helps me focus weirdly more. I don't understand why, but it does.
You know, apparently that's a thing. So I think you're onto something because I've heard a lot of people say that they can focus more in a coffee shop or with music on or some kind of white noise on more than total silence. So I think there's something to that. Any other questions? I just want to make sure I didn't miss anyone's hand. Yes.
Oh, thank you so much. That's so kind.
I'm going to just kind of carry forward this thought, and the question that I've been thinking of is, as a creative person, right, to give off rights to another, to see that they can then translate what you've thought of and do justice to that, right? So one is that would you be involved in that screenplay? Would you have any control over it? And second is, if not, how do you really make sure that what you have really conceptualized is what you actually see on screen?
That's a really good question. I think if this does become a TV series, I have made it known that I would like to be in the writer's room because I just think it'd be a fantastic experience to be a part of the creative process of a TV series. But for whatever reason, if I'm not involved, and it just becomes, it's adapted without my input, I think there's a certain letting go you have to do and recognizing that TV series is its own entity and not the novel. And luckily I was able to already write the novel and it'll always exist. And it might be strange, you know, to see Dava up there and not be my conception of her, but at the same time, I think I'll have to just kind of let it go and hope for the best and hope that there's a creative team that really represents my novel, understands my reasons for writing it. And to that end, I should say that I made that point very clear to the people involved that I need to have an Indian woman writing this. So I have a lot of faith and hope that that will happen.
That's very exciting. Any other questions? So what are you watching or reading or taking in podcasts, anything lately that you're enjoying?
Gosh, that's such a good question. I've just started watching The Crown.
Ooh, oh, the latest season.
The latest
How
season.
is it?
Interesting.
Okay. Okay.
I don't know how I feel about it yet.
Okay.
It's really interesting to see an adaptation of something that happened in our lifetime. Like when The
Yes,
Crown
yes.
started, it was like, it kind of felt like history, right? Something you read in the
Totally.
history books. But now they're covering the 90s. And I was in high school in the 90s. So it's just kind of an interesting thing to see.
Ooh.
Yeah.
I didn't think about that's how it would feel because I haven't started this season, but that's so true.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so true.
In terms of podcasts, if anyone here is interested in writing at all, or interested in publishing or learning more about the process, there's some really great podcasts. There's a podcast called This Shit No One Tells You About Writing, which is fantastic because they actually go over the process of publishing and how you reach out to agents with query letters and also interviews with authors. So even though I'm a published novelist, I love listening to that podcast because I still learn new things every time. So. Gosh, you know, for a person who's so pop culture focused, I wish I could think of more things.
No pressure, no pressure. I was just wondering, like, what came to mind if I even asked, because I feel like I'm taking in things all the time that are varying ranges of quality. So, was there anything that you hoped people would take away from your book?
That's a good question. I think the same thing that I took away from writing it. It really made me think a lot about the concept of legacy and the idea that, especially when I was an entertainment reporter covering the deaths of celebrities, you know, you're used to these bold-faced names getting coverage of what they accomplished along the way and the lives that they affected and impacted. But in writing this novel, I'm like, well, it's not, legacy is a word that belongs to all of us, no matter who we are or what we've done. Like, we all leave a legacy, we all leave a mark. And it's something to be cognizant of throughout our lives. I think sometimes we just kind of live our lives on a day-to-day basis and don't think about the impacts we have on the people in our families and our friends and communities. And so that's a lesson that I took away from writing the novel that I hope that readers take away as well.
I love that. I love that so much. Have you been able to visit different book clubs and things for the book?
I've zoomed into quite a few book clubs, and it's always a joy because one of the things, and you probably know this too, people sometimes tend to see things in your book that you don't see yourself.
Yes.
And that's one of the best parts about writing a novel and publishing it is not, it's the feedback from readers.
Yes, absolutely.
And learning how it impacted them, or maybe they see themselves in that certain character, or just they feel seen,
Yes.
which is so important because I feel like for the longest time, I don't think I ever felt seen. So if my novel gives that to other people, that's the best thing in the world.
I love that. My first book club was virtual, and it was during the pandemic. And actually, one of the readers on the book club had written a chapter of my book 5 years in the future that went through all the characters. And she was like, "What do you think of this?" And I said, "You did a better job than I did."
That's amazing.
That's what I think. And so I think it's so interesting. I don't know if anyone here has had virtual book clubs with other readers in their lives, but it's been such an interesting thing in the pandemic, since the pandemic started, right? Where people really connect. And I've heard of people kind of connecting with childhood friends and people from all across the country and world. And I feel like people have just been reading and sharing their love of books more, right, since 2020. One silver lining.
Yeah, I've had, I had like, sometimes it's like the most wonderful random things from childhood friends I haven't spoken to who get in touch and want to do a book club to, there was a Pilates bar in Georgia who were like, "We just started a book club and we're reading your book first." And I thought, fantastic, that's great.
What are your thoughts on author life and then the social media part of it? You know, because I know that's something we've talked about a lot as well, right? Like, how do we manage ourselves on social media versus do we at all, and all of that? You know, what comes to mind for you for that?
It's incredibly hard.
Yes, I agree.
Because as writers, we tend to go into writer caves and just kind of, it's a very internal life. You don't really, it's not like, how do I say this? You spend a lot of time by yourself. It can be a very solitary thing to do. And then once you publish a book, it's a 180, and suddenly there's a spotlight on you, and not just that, but you're expected to be more out in the world and like pursuing social media followers, or just pursuing the spotlight and get comfortable with people like seeing you out in the world. And so I try to think of it in terms of, it's not about like trying to be on social media so much, but trying to find the social media that works best for me, and trying to engage with readers and kind of trying to show the content that I think they would be interested in. So it's not necessarily about me so much, but maybe if they connected to my book for a reason, I want to share things that hopefully they'll also connect with.
Well, I love your social media. So if anyone here doesn't follow Kirthana already on Instagram, I highly recommend doing so. Maybe now.
Same with Saumya, by the way.
No, but I do much more. I feel like a mashup of stuff. Like, I feel like you stay true to, your books.
But see, that's so interesting because I think yours is such a good reflection of who you are and your interests, because if you don't know, besides being a very acclaimed published author, she's also a therapist who does a lot of appearances on the news such as NBC. And I think your Instagram is so good about just sharing like tips and advice about just living life, especially if you're a working mother, especially if you're balancing a lot. And I think your Instagram is a very good reflection of your interests and what people can expect from you as a person, and also from your books too.
Oh, thank you so much. What's the most common thing on my Instagram is my mom sending me reels that are passive aggressive, I don't know, aggressive messages. Like just this morning she sent one, and it was a woman peeking out behind a wall, and it said like, "When you want your daughter to call you back."
Oh my God, that's amazing. I love that.
So that's the value for me of being on that platform. Any kind of thing coming up for you today as we're, talking about stuff?
In terms of?
Just in terms of your writing process, what you're going through now?
I'm thinking about book 3.
Okay, cool.
There's ideas percolating. I think I'm trying to expand myself as an author because I want to always challenge myself and try to do new and different things, while also being honest about what's interest of me and what I like to write about. So, just my first 2 novels are third-person close, and I was thinking for my 3rd novel, I'd do a dual narrative and maybe challenge myself that way.
Ooh, that's so exciting to even hear about as a potential reader. Yeah, that's awesome.
So that's where I am right now.
Oh, that's so great. I love what you also said about percolating, because I feel like the creative process sometimes is about just taking things in, right? And then sitting with them and seeing what comes up. There's something that's so valuable to that, and it might not always look like writing and having words come out, right?
I think what people don't always understand about writers is that even if we're just sitting there, like quietly,
Which we so often are.
Which we so often are, we're always thinking. There's always just like stuff happening in our brains as we're kind of just absorbing the world and thinking about ways that we can incorporate into our writing. I'm always thinking about I don't know, even I'm watching, trashy reality television. I just think there's a lot of interesting dynamics. You're watching two people having a conversation and how they relate to each other. It makes me think about what can I do to incorporate that into a novel and how could I maybe transplant some of this into a story. So
I bet Andy Cohen could put a lot into a novel if that's what he chose to do.
I'm sorry?
Right? I bet Andy Cohen could put a lot into a novel if he ever chose to do that,
think
because
he
he's
could,
taking in
right?
so many personal dynamics.
That's such a good point. He kind of actually acts as a de facto therapist.
Yes, he is a group therapist.
during the
Absolutely. In the
reunions?
reunions. Yes, I was going to text you that the other day. I was like, do you think he's a group therapist by training, and didn't tell us? So it's so true though, because no matter what we take in, it means something, right? The internalization of it, it does something. And I feel like sometimes the best ideas come from actually not directly sitting in front of the computer and directly doing the work. I was reading about this differentiation between focused thinking and I think it was called focused versus diffuse thinking. And focused is when you look at the task at hand and you try to just go all in on it. And then diffuse is when you keep the idea in the back of your mind, you do another task that uses another part of your body, maybe something with your hands or a chore or something like that, and then an idea comes to mind.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
I find that washing the dishes and long walks and taking a shower, because your brain is not focused on anything. So often I think, and I'm guilty of this too, I'm always multitasking. I am not just watching a TV show or just reading. I'm doing 100 other things. I'm on my phone, I'm texting, I'm checking social media. But when you find yourself in a moment where your brain has to rest and be quiet, like washing dishes, that's where I feel like a lot of my ideas come from. So that's a really good point.
Yeah, definitely. How are we doing on time, by the way?
So we still have a time. The session ends by 5:50. So we have about 25 minutes.
Well, let's talk about your books then.
I think what you said, though, is a really great answer. That's part of the process. Like if they ask what you were doing, I was processing. I was doing the process.
Just to go back to the first thing that you mentioned, it's just the idea of, I don't know if I've ever really feel like I've figured it out or navigated that. I think, I was just having this conversation the other day, I carry a lot of guilt, actually, in terms of all of this, because I come from a traditional 9-to-5 background where there's a structure, and this is when you clock in, and this is when you clock out when you're writing. And I have the privilege for the most part of being a full-time writer. I kind of can write when I want to. And so sometimes I do kind of feel bad that, sometimes my writing was best at 11 o'clock at night. Sometimes it's best, at noon with the TV blaring. And so I feel like I'm getting away with something sometimes because I'm just like, this is my job now, but it doesn't feel like structured and the traditional way we think of things, especially coming from, an Indian family and what the expectations are of what you become, what you're asked to do when you're in an Indian family. There's an expectation of seeking a job that was a lot of security. And I was lucky in the sense that my parents were supportive of my writing, but it still doesn't mitigate the guilt and feeling like I'm getting away with something somehow.
Some hands. I'm going to go around the room this way.
I was just going to say, do you watch, are there any Hindi language movies or American movies, or responses between the two, that influence your writing or influencing your thinking of ideas or anything like that?
That's a good question. I have to think. For Dava, more than TV and movies, it really was music, because music was such a defining part of my life when I was in high school through a young adult. And it kind of, as I mentioned before, I didn't really ever felt represented or seen in the films or TV, when I was growing up. But in music, I felt like I still found a way to see myself for the first time, if that makes sense. I feel like when I would read books, it kind of gave me an opportunity to see other people, other communities, other ways of life, history throughout the centuries. But music kind of made me feel like, kind of go internal and think about, oh, what do I want from life? What are my dreams? What are my ambitions? And nothing had really inspired that in me before. So I wanted to give that same relationship to music I have to Dava and show how Dava's love of music kind of inspired her throughout the life and kind of made her the person she is.
In fiction writing, one of the challenges I've struggled with is when you feel you're onto something and it's not fully formed. So do you wait for that notion to fully develop and then you start typing away, or you just trust your own instincts and just keep writing and then hit a wall like it happens with sometimes. So what's your, do you see a struggle at all there, or what's been your experience?
Yeah, I definitely see that struggle. I think for the most part, I push through it. I try to just write it out. I think when I conceived of both my novels, the way I did that was honestly opening up an email draft in my Gmail and just like kind of writing it out and ask myself, why do I want to write this novel? What is it of interest to me? What do I think readers will get out of it? And writing that note to myself and kind of expressing to myself why do I want to write this novel, and I'm able to conceive what the novel will be about. So that's, for me, that's where outlining becomes such a crucial thing, because it gives me the space to kind of figure out what this book is going to be about chapter by chapter. So by doing that work in advance, I don't necessarily always run into that wall, because I kind of figured it out before I started writing the book. But there are occasions where I'm just like, I don't know. I don't know what this chapter, what this conversation is going to be or how it's going to move the story forward. And I just kind of push through it. For me personally, I try to, if I'm working on a novel, I try to give, my goal is 1,000 words a day. So if I have that goal as a daily goal in mind, that if I'm stuck in something, I just like, well, if I just reach 1,000 words, then I feel like I accomplished something. And I can always go back to it later in revision. But in general, I do try to push through it.
You both spoke about then like Becca and then also popular culture and how it's influenced your writing. And now there are all these shows with South Asian characters, reality TV shows, and then I don't remember the show with the girl baby in it.
Never read.
Yeah. So there's all of that that's emerging, and streaming has made that possible, and our society has changed. But so how do you see your work fitting in with that? Does that influence you, or is there some ricocheting back and forth? It was amazing to hear today about people's early influences. Other writers spoke about Bharati Mukherjee and Ravi Purani, but there is now so much more that's available and out there, and that South Asian writers are producing. But I was just curious about the influence of popular culture and South Asian characters in your work, if there is.
I think for me, to answer the first part of your question, one of the best things about this kind of explosion in terms of TVs and film featuring South Asian people, it feels like there's more freedom to tell any kind of stories we want now. Whereas before, when there was such limited representation, I remember feeling there was a movie that came out a long time ago, I think called American Daisy, and I wasn't the biggest fan of it. And I felt like it was so important. We don't only get very few shots to be in popular culture, at least at that time, and I didn't want it to be so stereotypical. At least I found it to be stereotypical. And so I was maybe too much, very critical of it, but it was only because I felt like there's so many limited opportunities.
The stakes feel high.
The stakes felt high. And now it feels like, it's just like a natural part of our pop culture. Like we're even featured in reality shows. Like there's just kind of, there's just, all sorts of things. It feels like, for me, I don't think I could have published Dava 10 years ago. I don't think there'd been a place for it. I think people have been confused because it didn't fit into a certain expectation of what we expect from South Asian literature. And so I feel very lucky to be able to write and publish that book, because I do feel like there's more, people are more open to that concept, that Indian culture and Indian people aren't a monolith, and we have so many different experiences and different ways of viewing the world, and just different ways of growing up in this country too. How about you?
Yeah, I feel the same way. I think that the more we see, the better it is, because I don't think one story can represent an entire community, whether we're talking about our community or any other community. So I think volume actually is the answer. When we see more types, I think that just makes things better for the viewers and the creators, really all around. And I think because some of these shows, like the ones you mentioned, Never Have I Ever, and the reality ones, they're newer, I think, right? Like at least I've been consuming them for the past year, binging really. And so they haven't influenced my work, but I think they've just made me excited about the possibilities that are out there. So I love seeing us on the screen in all ways.
If we have a few minutes, do you want to talk about your novels?
Oh, sure.
Can we do that? Because I don't know if anyone knows here, but Saumya also had her first novel, Well-Behaved Indian Women, optioned for television, which is amazing. So would you mind telling us a little bit about your novel and what inspired it?
Sure. So Well-Behaved Indian Women is about 3 generations of women, Nani the grandmother, Nandini the mom, and Simran the daughter, and how they all go through struggles in their marriages and careers, how they drift apart and how they come back together. So the book really was inspired by actually not seeing books with people who I thought looked like my family and friends growing up. I read a lot of Babysitters Club books when I was younger. I read a lot of Sweet Valley Twins. Whatever series I could get my hands on, I would read. And when I was in high school, I wondered where were the books that had people just going through their family drama with their parents and having conflicts about whether they were allowed to date and all these things that my friends and I were grappling with. And so I decided to start trying to write one right between college and medical school, and very naively thought that because I had an idea, it was then going to be on the shelves in a year. So that's how naive I was. It took 10 years and over 200 rejections to get my publishing deal. So it was a very good learning lesson for me, personally and professionally. Learning how to fail was very, very important and continues to be. And I first started out actually writing about Simran, the daughter, and her fiance, and actually just wanted to explore what it's like to plan a big Desi wedding and all the things that can come with it, all of the opinions, all of the choices, all the overbearing relatives, like everything. And then when I was in medical school, I experienced actually during my clinical rotations a lot of unexpected sexism and racism throughout the entire year that I was doing my clinical work. And I had always known that Simran's mom, Nandini, was a family medicine physician who had trained, obviously, in the generation before mine. But it was when I was actually in the midst of my own training, I started to wonder, what was it like for a woman who had to have experienced this on an entirely different level than I was? She must have gone through it even worse than I did. How did she navigate this? And what if her ambition actually didn't have any boundaries? What would that look like for her? If for her to really pursue her ambition meant leaving her family and making very hard personal decisions, how would that play out? So those questions then led to creating her storyline and then the grandma's storyline as well. And I wrote 4 chapters from her perspective and sent them to agents, that manuscript to agents, the week of my own wedding, actually. So the day of my wedding, I got 4 rejections in a row.
Oh my God.
Why was I checking my email the day of the wedding? Why? But I don't know. Probably some detail coming through about food or something. That's what I'm going to say, because there always was. And so I got the 4 rejections in a row, and they actually all 4 said, we don't think this is ready, but we really like this storyline with the mom. Would you ever consider adding more of the mom? So throughout my residency training, I just kept writing more and more and more from the mom's perspective, and then it became an intergenerational story. So really a process of percolating, actually, as you said before, and it wouldn't have happened without that.
That's amazing. How brave are you to query while you're getting in the weeks leading up to your wedding?
You know what, though? I think the interesting thing about rejection, I'd love to hear if anybody else has thoughts on this. I think the really interesting thing for me was that up until the point I started writing more seriously, I was so used to everybody approving of what I was doing. Like, I got perfect grades. I, said the right things. I people pleased. Like everything was very obedient and pleasing, And so it was only when I started writing that people didn't really understand what I was doing, and that I was starting to get rejected, right? That had never happened to me in a professional setting. And so I think I actually really needed to learn that, because once it happened a dozen times, they actually didn't sting as much anymore. I started realizing this is information. This isn't a personal worth, evaluation at all. This is information on how to become better, and I need to take the information.
That's such a good point. And I think there's something to be just said about the fact that if you receive rejection and you keep going with it, that tells you how much you want it also. If you can go forward and be I've got 10 rejections and no one seems to like this book, but I'm going to keep going with it anyway, then that tells you yourself, okay, I want to pursue this. This is something that happened. And like you said, you develop an armor for the rejection, which I think is so important because even after you get published, there's still so much rejection
There's
waiting
still
for
stuff.
you.
And I feel like any creative process just has uncertainty and this unknown in it. I think it doesn't matter what creative pursuit you have. I think there's some level of unknown, maybe isolation and loneliness that can come with it. And so to count all the wins, no matter how small or big they are, and then to have a community that really understands what you're going through and can, be there for you in all the moments, I think both are so valuable.
Agreed.
Thank you for being part of that community with me.
Likewise.
Really. And we were talking about, because we both write about families, and so we were talking about how it was for our families to also read our work and to know about our work too.
It was very strange. It was very strange. But that's one of the great things too, because I don't know, I'd love to hear about your story too. My parents wanted to read this book for a long time, and I was very nervous about it because,
Yeah, same.
there's like sex in it and extramarital affairs in it. I'm like, I don't know how my parents will react. But eventually, I think my dad was a little surprised by it, but eventually he came around and they both really embraced the book. And I think they loved seeing a family story play on the page. And it was really gratifying to know that my parents liked it and that they enjoyed reading it, because I don't think I would become a writer without them and their support. So it meant a lot.
Same. My parents really were so supportive, and I was really scared when they were reading it. I was so nervous. My parents also, when I think I was in college, I was going to say high school. No, I was older than that. And they would change the TV if there was a scene where two characters were about to kiss.
Same.
So, we would all be sitting in the living room, and then they'd just say, okay, pause. And my siblings and I were all in our 20s, and so I just didn't know how that would go. But I think what's really interesting is just seeing actually our own parents even evolve, right, and grow, because they're also learning too. And that was one thing my parents kept telling me. They said, we're learning too. Just be patient with us. And I thought that was such a compassionate thing to say, for them to remind me that we're all kind of working on this together and growing together.
That's such a good point. And I would say in writing this book and just talking about it with my parents, for the first time, I think I got to see them as people versus parents. When you're growing up with your parents, you kind of, again, see them through a certain vantage point and through a certain perspective of their authority. But that's one of the gratifying things about, because they call me up every weekend and said, what's new? What's happening now? What's happening next with the book? What's the latest developments? And just getting to relate to them on a personal level as adults has been gratifying and something I didn't expect to experience either. And it's been really quite something.
Yeah, definitely. Do we have any questions coming up? Actually, I just want to make sure that we're checking in.
So I have one question.
I was I heard that from a microphone.
Yeah. So it's actually for both of you. But so how do you deal with writer's block?
I think you just have to kind of understand that it's a possibility. And as I was saying earlier, you kind of push through it. Sometimes I just free write. If I'm stuck in a scene and I don't know how to get out of it, then I'm just gonna keep writing until basically I hit gold or hit something that kind of makes sense to me, and then go with that. And sometimes, I think you have to close the laptop, walk away from your computer, take a walk, do whatever you need to do, because sometimes if you're too focused and trying too hard to write something, it might not happen. You might just need to take a break, kind of maybe think it through more without the pressure of sitting at your laptop trying to write. And that's also helped me a lot too.
I'll say for me, it might be divided into two categories, because sometimes I'm blocked because I'm truly blocked creatively. I don't know what to do. And with that, I will take the walk, or I'll take in something that's always inspired me, whether it's a show or a movie or something, and just sit with it and see how it feels. The other side of that is that if I'm blocked because I'm very tired, then I know that I need sleep, and really no amount of any other activity will help me. I became a new mom during the pandemic and was also working on my second book, and I will say the sleep deprivation really, really impacted the process more than I ever thought. And no amount of rituals of any type helped me, but really just prioritizing my sleep. So I think I try to get to the root cause of it and then go from there.
I'm curious, as writers, a lot of times the goal for any writer is to put a book out. That's what everybody thinks should be the goal. And I'm kind of wondering, is that the case for both of you? And also, a secondary question, has that changed for you now that you each had multiple books?
Wow, that's a good question. And I say that because before you get published, the only thing I ever had in mind was I just want to see my book on a bookshelf in a bookstore. That's it. And that would make me happy. I don't care if anyone even reads it. I just want to know it exists and it's on a bookshelf. But what happens is, in like the months leading up to publication, you learn about something called best of lists and most anticipated lists. And then you're suddenly like, will I be on that list of most anticipated? Will I be that best of list? And it puts so much pressure on you because you're like, oh, wait, my book is not just this personal thing for me, it's a product. And it's very competitive in publishing. And you just don't know. You feel like you start to feel like you don't know if you're good enough because you didn't make so-and-so list, or you didn't get so-and-so interview, or a certain review. And that can be very frustrating, and it can be very just difficult and challenging. But the good thing is, once you come out on the other side and have a book out in the world, all the other stuff for the most part fades away because you start receiving feedback from readers, which is by far the most important and precious thing that comes from it. So, and I think now having 2 books out or about to be out, it makes it a little easier. It's no longer like this lifelong dream. Now it's just like, oh, it's my job. I'm very lucky, but it's no longer this yearning thing I have to do. It's just the thing I get to do now.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything you said. That was my goal, and then once it happened, I was like, oh, so I'm done forever? So I'm done, okay? But what I actually think unifies every writer I know is that even once they've hit whatever that marker is, whether it's 1,000 words a day or getting the book out or, having this many readers reach out to them, I think they still return to the love of writing. Like, they have to write. And so I think that's what they always come back to. And then those other goals kind of fade away. And I think they become products of that work, but I don't think they always become the compass.
I totally agree with that, yeah.
I have one question. Slightly difficult one, so I don't know how to put this. But just as authors, right, when you, and especially in a space like this where you are in America, do you feel that there is an expectation of you to stick to your own identity and write from that space? Or have you ever stepped out of that comfort zone and thought of a different narrative, which maybe your publishers have accepted? So, as I said, I'm sorry, it's a little complicated, but.
No, that's a good question. I think for me personally, like I said earlier, because I never felt like I always felt seen in the pop culture I consumed or even the books I read, it's important for me, at least for now, to always have an Indian protagonist in my novels. But sometimes I do run into the feeling like maybe my books aren't Indian enough for certain people because I'm not delving into certain cultural things. I'm trying to what my goal with my novels is that my protagonists live in the world and they just happen to be Indian. So their identity and their heritage is important to who they are, and it's not the only thing that defines them. I just want them to be people in the world. They're not the most, smartest or most amazing people. They can be like mediocre. They can be, maybe not the nicest people, but they're human. And that's why I really want my protagonists to feel human and not representative or symbolic of any sort of thing. So that's what my goal is in my writing, but sometimes I do feel like there's an expectation maybe I can make my book a little more Indian or a little more palatable to what is expected from an Indian novel, if that makes sense.
I love that that's how you started out with your novel writing. I think that's incredible because I was kind of the opposite, where for my first 2, I thought, okay, I want to write about the obedient daughter of immigrants, and what she's like and what she goes through. That's the person I know the most, and I want to do that. And for my 3rd book, I'm actually writing about a CEO and startup founder who's a new mom. And so it is very different and it is challenging. And I think it's important, we were just talking about this, like challenging ourselves, right, with each project and making sure that we're stretching our muscles. But I think we do also feel a responsibility to our community and a gratitude to the community. We want to make sure that, we're accessible to the community. And so I think, again, the volume, when we see more and more books and stories from our community, that'll also help.
Yeah, definitely makes sense.
So we'll take one last question and then we'll conclude this session.
Has there been any situation after writing the book that then you ask yourself, what will my character do in your own life?
Wow. That's a good question. I don't think I have, just because me and my main character Dava are such different people. I sometimes I get like how are you similar to your character? And I say, oh, we're both billionaires. That's a joke. It's not true, obviously. But I think of her as more of a mentor figure versus a person that I would ever I don't know. She lives her life in such a strange way where she really wants to be well known and defined and she's very controlling also. So I guess I don't really think of her that way, which made her really fun to write, but not a person that I would think about what would Dava do, because I don't think she would do anything that was very normal, if that makes sense.
I sometimes do. I don't know if that's really strange, but in my second book, I do have the family going to family therapy, and there's only one session covered in the book, and I do sometimes wonder, because I do therapy as well for my day job, and I wonder, what are they talking about, and have they evolved past that first conversation? The main character in the second book wants to be a stand-up comedian, and so she's still, I think she's still kind of going out and about and trying to get gigs and do her job, and so I sometimes wonder about her whenever I come across a comedian.
I love that.
She's alive and well in my braid. This is why my braid works the way it does. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for
everybody.
being here with us.